Brian F. asks, not to be confused with Brian L., that's this guy right here, but Brian F. asks, at one point, you, Brian L., said that Google is the biggest threat to open source due to the way they monetize their software. Okay, backstory on that. This didn't just come out of nowhere. Someone specifically sent in a question that said, which company is the bigger threat to open source? Google, Microsoft, or Adobe? Were those were the three I think that they listed. And I said among those, I think it was probably Google. And I thought it was Google because of the way they monetize. They're an advertising firm. And so because they're an advertising firm, I felt like that presented the largest likelihood of a threat to possible future success in open source. Anyway, do you think that software as a service, SaaS, is necessarily bad, or can tools like the AGPL allow software as a service to be expressed in a healthy way? Do you have any thoughts on the AGPL in general? This is actually a kind of a fascinating question. All right, so AGPL is fine. I have no problems or issues with the GPL, with the AGPL. They're great, solid licenses. Obviously, AGPL is more used for soft server-side infrastructure stuff. I have no issue with that in general. However, honestly, I do actually have an issue with software as a service. I do have an issue with that. And my issue is multiple fold, and it's a practical thing. It's not a moral, everything should be free thing, because you can make a software as a service sort of thing. Like, let's say, I don't know, like a Google Apps sort of thing. And you can make it entirely under the GPL, free software, give the code away, and that is awesome. From a ethical, moral standpoint, it's glorious. My issues relating to software as a service become much more practical ones. If you are using something like let's say Google Docs, right? And or something of that kin, where you are reliant on an existing company continuing to exist and running a server infrastructure that is unchanging forever in order to continue using the things that you use, the same data that you're working with, the same documents, spreadsheets, Word documents, or word processing documents, all of it, your reliance on so many things that have never happened before. There has never in the history of humanity been a software company that keeps something going forever. It's never existed before, and that's reasonable that it's never existed before. However, it's ever more interesting that it's never existed because the software industry hasn't really existed all that long, and yet there's still not a software company that I've ever heard of, and this includes like Microsoft, that has kept a product going that has been essentially unchanged but continued to be supported on old, current, and next-gen operating systems and hardware the entire length of the software industry. It hasn't existed, and it's reasonable that it hasn't existed. It's not a reasonable thing to ask Microsoft to release, let's say, Microsoft Word 1.0, and that's the last that we ever heard of it. Like, they continue to support it and patch it and keep it fixed and running on every platform, but it never gets any massive file document structure changes or anything forever. Like, that would be a ridiculous idea, right? However, with software as a service, it gets so much worse, because if you have software that you can run locally, that you can put on your machine, that means that you can, in theory, archive that piece of software and dig it up and run it later. Whether it's an operating system, an application suite, a video editor, old versions of Photoshop, whatever, you can dig it back up and reuse it. If it's a software as a service, the odds of you being able to reuse it are almost zero. The longer the time goes between the time that you use the product and the current point in time that we currently exist, the odds grow increasingly closer to zero. It just ramps right towards it. And that is troublesome to me. If I want to play a video game that is essentially a software as a service thing, such as like some sort of web-based game or something like that, I better enjoy it now, because I will never be able to come back and enjoy it again, at least not like it is now. If it was released as a standalone executable, at least then we have the opportunity to create emulators for it, or if it's open source, like we're talking about here with something being under AGPL or such a license, you can potentially patch it and get it working again. But if it's a software as a service model, you might not have access to the data on the servers. The data might change. Your ability to control that data might change. The terms of service might change. The existence of the company might change. The product itself might change just enough to make it break for your use case, but still technically exist. Or it might just break or go away entirely. Look at Google. Google gets rid of everything. Everything Google makes, Google gets rid of. Everything. The only thing they don't get rid of is Google search. That's the only thing. And that hasn't gotten a lot better. In fact, I'd wager to say it's a lot worse than it used to be. So I am not a fan of software as a service. I'm truly not. And it's not because technologically it doesn't have value. It absolutely has value. It being able to prop up a software as a servicey server somewhere that people like all within a company or community can connect to, and they're all using instantly the same version of a suite of applications for communicating or collaborating. That's awesome. That is totally awesome. Excuse me, I gotta take a sip. I got myself all worked up. That's awesome. However, eventually, if someone else is controlling it, that goes away. Now, if, and this is a big if you have the ability to self-host with absolutely zero prerequisites, preconditions, system requirements on other services, like you don't need to connect to Google's, I don't know, stats or login or OAuth servers or anything like that. It is all self-contained, 100% on your own server that you can control and no one else can mess with it, and you can archive it and keep it how you want it forever. Then I think software as a service is awesome. Really awesome. The moment another entity controls it, or the moment what you have becomes reliant on someone else, I think it sucks. I think it sucks a ton, and it has nothing to do with the licenses. It's just the concept in and of itself. We should have power over the software, over the data, over all of our information. I think that is an absolutely critical thing to computing, and that is something that in many ways we have lost over the last several years. In the olden days, even when our software and our operating systems were closed source as heck, we still owned them, you know? We got them on floppy disks or whatever, and they were ours. That version of MS-DOS 5.0 and Windows 3.1 and Macintosh System 6 or whatever, they were ours. We had it. If we ever wanted to restore it, we just stick that in the floppy drive and reinstall. And it was ours, and no one else could mess with it. There was no auto updates. There was no activation. There was no spying going on. Our data wasn't being uploaded somewhere crazy. It was just here, and it was local, and it was a self-contained, awesome little universe of software. And that is part of what free software and somewhat, to a certain degree, open source gives us nowadays, is much more control over our software. But when we start relying on outside services just to keep our system functional, like it is when in software as a service type applications, that ruins that entirely. It takes that freedom away from us. And I think that freedom inherently is the critical bit. You know what I mean? It's not just I have access to the source code. It's I have access to the source code. I can install it wherever I want, whenever I want. I can modify it. I can audit it. I can verify that it's not reliant on anyone else. It's not reliant on some closed source bit of code that's sitting on someone's servers running in a Google closet somewhere. It's mine. And this exact server running Nextcloud or whatever is going to be running for 50 years if I wanted to. That's why that's the right way to do it. Whoa, where am I going out here? Holy, look at that. See that right there? That's not today at all. That was last week. That's what happens when you push the wrong button. This episode the Duke Show is brought to you in part by Purism. If you want great laptops, and you do, you want ones running free software because, well, that's what you want. You go over to Purism's website, PRI.sm, and you find a company. They actually aren't even like a normal company. They are what they call a social purpose company. They are a company that puts, above all else, your privacy, your freedom first. That's cool, right? Most companies, you go to a big company and you say, hey, giant company that makes hardware, what's your number one goal? Well, their number one goal, they might say a lot of things. They might say, well, they want to make great products. Every company says that. But they're realistically, if like there's some publicly traded company, their number one goal is to profit for the shareholders, right? Well, Purism's number one goal is, and you go check it out, all the stuff on their website, is to focus on your privacy and your freedoms and then make a profit. But they focus on you first. And I love that. They're also making a cell phone. You can't go wrong with a cell phone that has that as the focus. And the people there, this is what they eat and breathe. They believe it. They are true believers, and I love them for it. And if you want to get the MP3 version of this show, go to lunduke.com, go to patreon.com. Here's some links. Click on these links. Go read Linux Journal. I write articles over there. It's absolutely fantastic. I'll see you guys tomorrow.